We're slowly approaching half the registered number, and we're a couple minutes past noon, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for tuning into this edition of Webinars for Busy Lawyers. These monthly webinars are designed to bring you practical information in 20 to 30 minutes that you can implement immediately in your practice. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Judy Selby. She is principal at Judy Selby Consulting. She's got 25 years of commercial litigation, insurance coverage litigation experience. She's now a leader on the topic, writing and speaking prolifically. Before I turn it over to Judy to say a few more words about herself and take it away with the topic, I'd just like to let you know that we will have time at the end of the presentation to take your questions. You can put those questions in the chat box and I will relay those to Judy at the very end. So Judy, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. And congratulations for focusing on this topic. I think it's a really, really important topic for attorneys, not just for their own practices, but also if you're asked by your clients about cyber coverage. So there's also there are a lot of misconceptions out there, so hopefully we can bring some clarity to all of that today. And that's why I chose the title Demystifying Cyber Insurance. Let's just dive right in and talk about the real basics of cyber insurance. Some important things to remember at the outset is that although this coverage is relatively new in the grand scheme of things, these are still insurance policies. Many of the terms and provisions, conditions, exclusions that are contained in cyber insurance policies are contained in many, many other different types of policies. So they're just a specialized type of insurance product. And I always like to mention that because it's not something that you really want to dabble in unless you really understand insurance law and insurance concepts, at a certain level. But in terms of the coverage provided under cyber insurance policies, I'm going to talk you'll hear me probably use the terms to use often because there are no standard forms. There's not like you would see for a homeowner's policy. There are no standard policies yet. I don't know if they're coming. So it's a little bit of the Wild West out there. Broad statements about. So at their most basic, at the most fundamental level, cyber situation or a network event. So I'll break those down a little bit more. So if you have a hacking incident, an intrusion into a computer network, and somebody goes in and steals data, that would be a breach type of event that might trigger coverage under a policy. If you inadvertently send out an email message, the Outlook to box auto-populates and you send out a message to the wrong person and there's confidential data in that email, or you leave the laptop on a bus, those types of things where you're actually disclosing, the quarterback, the team, is that you get attorney-client privilege, hopefully applying over everything that happens in terms of the company's response to the incident. Oftentimes you'll need a forensic expert. If you leave some papers on a bus, you wouldn't need forensic experts probably. But if it's like a data breach type of situation where somebody comes in and hacks into your network, you'll probably need a forensic expert to figure out what happened, how they got in, what they took, are they out, things like that. Also, if the breach has triggered notification requirements under the state law or federal law at issue, if you have to notify customers, I think everybody in America is all too familiar with that. That's expensive. There's coverage for that. If you need public relations help, if you start getting bad press around an incident, there's coverage for that. And then, of course, to get in there and kind of remediate your data, things of that nature, data restoration after some type of an incident. There's coverage for that. So for small companies, small to mid-sized companies in particular, that don't have the internal expertise and the financial ability to deal with an incident like that, cyber coverage, can really be a lifesaver for you. And there's also coverage for third-party exposure. So typically, let's say you're in a situation where your computer network is co-opted and you start sending out malware to third party, or you're part of a DDoS attack, or you have the data breach situation and you start getting sued by customers, clients, whatever. There's coverage for that. That's the third party coverage, the liability coverage. And that's really, really important. Another part that I'll just touch on very briefly is that there's typically coverage for regulatory investigations and fines. There's no shortage now of regulations in this space, cyber and privacy. The coverage differs wildly depending on the insurance company, on the policy you're looking at. But not everybody needs the broadest reg. But the coverage is there. You just have to look at what your risks are and what type of coverage you would need. Now, the really great thing about the underwriters are working hard to develop competitive. And so the underwriters like to be very forward thinking to make their product different in the marketplace. And one way they do it is by providing some additional and some very cutting edge coverages in addition to the basic coverages. So two of the most important coverages that are available are business interruption and contingent or dependent, sometimes called supply chain business interruption coverage. So for the first one, for business interruption, if you have an incident where you're either your network is impaired or you're knocked offline, you can imagine if your law firm, if you're knocked offline for, a number of hours or, God forbid, a number of days or a couple of weeks, because of a covered incident. Maybe it's a hacking incident or some type of ransomware. If you trigger this coverage under the policy, then your lost profits and the extra expenses you have to pay in connection with being knocked offline could be covered there. Those are that's a time element coverage, meaning there's usually a waiting period associated with it. So the coverage wouldn't kick in until your network has been impaired or interrupted, totally interrupted for a certain number of hours. So the shorter the time period, the better for the insured. For contingent business interruption, this is so valuable in this era where we're also connected and we're also dependent on third parties to provide certain services for us. This coverage would kick in if your business partner has some type of an incident that knocks them offline. Again, you have to read the terms of your policy to see what would trigger that coverage. But so you may not have any type of incident at all affecting you, but if your business partner does and causes an interruption to your business, there could be coverage there. The entity that has the incident wouldn't be covered by your policy, just you would be. So that's really valuable. Social engineering coverage, I probably don't need to tell a group of lawyers how important this is. This is the coverage for the phishing schemes, wiring the money to different accounts, things of that nature. Very, very, very valuable coverage because these phishing emails are they continue to be really, really successful. They're getting more and more sophisticated. They're not just the Nigerian prince type of emails that we saw in the past. And even pretty savvy users fall prey to these types of schemes. So the coverage is super good. In a little bit, we'll get into some of the different types of coverages for it, but it's super effective. One thing I do want to point out at this point, though, is that there's been a lot of inaccurate press around coverage for these types of claims. There's been some, frankly, bad reporting out there about this. There's been some litigation, some coverage litigation on coverage for social engineering type of claims, where, you know, it's a little bit split right now whether the insurance company wins or whether the insured wins. But those cases are under crime policies, not under cyber policies. So, you know, I would just urge people to, you know, be careful when you read things in the press about cyber coverage, because all too often it's inaccurate. Cyber extortion coverage is also very, very important. I know lots of law firms, unfortunately, have been hit with ransomware. So there is coverage for that. That's good. Senior executive losses might be covered. This would be good for some of your clients, perhaps, if there's an intrusion into their computer network that somehow results in personal loss of funds by senior executives of the company. That's very good coverage to have, possibly for the firm, but also for your clients. Keep that in mind. And then there's coverage for something called bricking. Some carriers are offering. So if you have an event where your devices, let's say, are all rendered useless because of malware, although property coverage usually is not available, property damage coverage is not available under cyber policies, they will pay for replacement of devices that are bricked because it's just too expensive to try to get the malware off them. So again, in this day and age with really sophisticated malware being transmitted via email very successfully, oftentimes bricking coverage can be super, super important. Now, there are some great market opportunities in the cyber insurance space, but there's also some challenges. I'll discuss the opportunities because it's important to know this. As I mentioned, it's a competitive market. It's a soft market. Pricing is really, really good. So the coverage, the pricing for cyber insurance now is definitely, in my opinion, a buyer's market. And there's also the opportunity to negotiate. That's what I typically do for my clients, is negotiate terms to get them better coverage under the forms. And the insurance companies oftentimes are very agreeable to those types of things, in part because it's a soft market and there's this feeling of partnership with the insurers, which is, you know, not always what you expect in the insurance space, but it's definitely the current state in the cyber insurance market. I already mentioned that there are no standard forms, no standard policy language. That can make things real tricky, and I'll get into some examples in a few minutes on that. So you may look at cyber form A that says we'll cover you for a security event, and you look at policy B and it will say the same thing. But when you look at the definitions of the term security event in both policies, you can see they're very, very different. So it's really, really important to look at the form that you're getting. Don't just look at the heading. Don't just look at a title of an endorsement or a provision that provides a grant of coverage. Really read the wording and look at the definitions. It's a pain, but it's important, and it can be one or two words different. And I'll get into an example of that in a minute. One or two words can dramatically change your coverage. Another big problem here is a lack of understanding of cyber risk. Oftentimes I'll work with companies who don't think they have any cyber risk. They're like, well, we're not a big retailer, we're not a big hospital, so we don't really have any cyber risk. Hopefully that's starting to change now, hopefully especially for law firms. That's starting to change. Everybody has a cyber risk. If you're connected to the internet, you have a cyber risk. And these are oftentimes crimes of opportunity. They're not crimes of, looking for the richest target necessarily. And then another issue is around broker sophistication. Some brokers are good, many are not. They don't understand cyber, and And so just be careful when working with insurance brokers. Feel free to reach out to me. I know some good ones who really understand the importance of the wordings and the risks. And then of course, obviously, it's challenging because it's an evolving evolving area with emerging risks. The cyber threat landscape is constantly changing, so it makes it difficult to be current with these things as well. Now, the application process is also an evolving area. I have on this slide a lot of the areas that some insurers may ask you about, the types of data you're holding, if you have a history of prior events, cyber events over the past 2 or 3 years. Do you have procedures around if you wire money, things of that nature. I do have to say, though, that in the past, typically these applications, it might be now, depending on the insurer you're working with. There are some insurers now that will only ask 4 to 6 to 8 questions, typically around the issues that I just kind of called out. And they don't do too much digging, but they may want to do a scan, a non-intrusive scan, to see if your data is floating around on the dark web, that type of thing. But my real key advice around the application process is be 100% accurate to the best of your ability when you're answering the questions. There's a misconception that if you don't have perfect, that's really not true, unless you implicate an exclusion or if you lie in your application about something. So just be really, really accurate, and you'll probably still get the insurance even if you're not perfect. And companies with better and firms with better practices and that don't have a history of incidents might get better terms or better rates, things of that nature. But it's really important to be accurate. If you misrepresent something in the application, it could create grounds for the insurer to rescind the policy, and so you don't want to be in that position. So just be accurate. Here's an example of how the wording is so important in the policy. This is out of a pretty popular form that's on the marketplace that provides coverage for a data breach. So it's really, really important, in my view, for companies and law firms, really everybody, especially because so many people are in the cloud now, that you're covered for incidents that happen when the data is on your computer network, as well as when your data is on a third party's computer network. So let's say, for example, you're in the cloud, or some other company is hosting your data, like an e-discovery vendor, for example, hosting your data, and they have the incident. You want to make sure that your policy would respond if there is a data breach affecting that third party, but your data is breached. So if we look at this language here, this is a definition of data breach, and it's saying theft or loss of PII or third-party information that is in the care, custody, control of the insured organization. So that's good. Or a third party that for whom the third party information the insured organization is liable. So that's great. You have that coverage for your own network as well as a third party. Now we look at another example, and this is a different policy on the market. And so it's describing where you would get your coverage. And they say, yeah, it would be coverage for something that happens on your network or a third-party provider. And they actually provide an example of what a third party might be, including a cloud service provider, that are performing these types of services for you. They're hosting, processing, transmitting your data. Again, that's something good to see in a policy. Now, here's a policy that took a different approach. They define data breach as saying that, just like in that first example, care, custody, control of the insured organization or an individual contractor of the insured organization. So the term third party is gone. The term individual contractor is substituted in for that. And when you look down at that second paragraph, individual contractor is defined as a natural person. So if you have this type of provision in your cyber policy and there's a breach of the discovery vendor, breach of the cloud provider, breach of somebody who's hosting your data for you, you have a major, major problem. So look very closely at these types of issues. This is a good example of why it's important to read the form. Here's another example. This is an example of coverage for social engineering, and so they're talking about paying for loss for funds that are lost due to a fraudulently induced instruction. So that's nice, but when you get down into the fine print of this form, it only provides coverage where the fraudster is impersonating somebody who works for your company, so an employee of the insured company. So if you had somebody pretending to be a vendor who got you to transfer your money out to them instead of the real vendor, there wouldn't be coverage under that form. So look closely at that type of thing. This is an example of a policy that doesn't have that limitation. The fraudulent instruction can be by any third party or entity via email or any other means of electronic communication, because sometimes this happens by phone with the intent of misleading an insured. So this would be broader coverage than the example that I just showed. Now, the other insurance provision, this is a provision that's in really every insurance policy, not just cyber policies that's out there. Basically, what it's saying is, if there's two policies that are covering the same risk, the other policy goes first. And so what I'd like to do in this situation is, because sometimes people have cyber insurance coverage under other policies and they don't realize they have it. It could be under you could have an endorsement to a general liability policy. You could have an endorsement tacked on to your professional liability policy, and you don't want the insurers pointing at each other saying, you go first. So I like to include something in the other insurance provision of the cyber form that says we go first, at least with regard to breach response services. So those first party, we just had the incident, everybody's hair is on fire, you guys come in and save the day for us. At least make it clear that the cyber policy goes first in that circumstance. Company, but it's something to keep in mind, and most of the people whose knowledge would be relevant to the notice provision, I think is a very, very good idea. Now, here are some things that you really should watch out for, so you don't get yourself in a position where you have a claim challenge by the insurance company. So this is pretty important stuff. I touched on the first point already. Be honest in the application process. So if you say you always encrypt data at rest and you don't, or you used to, but then you stopped, be honest with the insurance company. have a good dialogue about these types of things, because if you say you do and then you have a claim that proved not to be true, you could get some serious pushback on your claim. The second point I included only to call it out, that it's always mentioned by a lot of people that there's exclusions in cyber policies if you're not following some kind of minimal standard of cybersecurity practices. That's just not true. There may have been provisions like that years ago. I haven't seen a provision like that in a cyber insurance policy in years. If you were looking at a form that had some type of a condition or exclusion or something in there that said anything like that, don't buy that form, or at a minimum, tell them to remove it. You don't want that in your policy. So it's one of the real misconceptions floating around out there. We spoke about the notice condition. It's important, in addition to what I already went over about that. It's important with regard to notice that they have had that obligation so get them in the loop. Law firms, your clients are oftentimes offering and taking on a lot of indemnity obligations in the technology space. Don't assume those are covered under your policy. So just look at that and keep that in mind as you're contracting. I like very explicit coverage in policies for rogue or malicious employees, as opposed to policies that provide coverage based on a scope of employment type of test. Acting within the scope of their employment. I don't need to put an issue of state law, so I prefer policies that actually call out, steal data, or do something bad. Imputation of intent provisions. You look at what law is going to be applied to this policy. This is especially important when you're looking at regulatory coverage. So I won't go into too much detail there. I'm going to just flag the issue for you. So here are 5 steps that can help you get the right cyber insurance. You have to understand what your risk exposure is. Not every company has the same risk exposure. So, one firm or company might have exposure to GDPR, the new European regulation, where another company may not. And so that second company wouldn't need that coverage. But identify what your cyber risks are. Review your existing insurance programs so you identify whether you have any cyber coverage, maybe tacked on to one of your other policies, as I discussed before. I already talked about responding accurately to the application. Make sure you match the cyber insurance that you're buying to your risk profile. There's a lot of, it's very modular, these cyber insurance policies. You kind of, it's almost like ordering off a menu, the coverages that you want. So make sure your coverage matches up well with your needs. And then make sure you understand your reporting and notice requirements under the policy, like when you have to give notice, who gives notice, who do we have to call if you do have an incident, and what we need to do in advance so you don't misstep there. I have an ebook, it's free on my website, called Demystifying Cyber Insurance. I go through the 5 steps and some other issues there, so feel free to go on my website and just download that and kind of walk you through some of the issues that what I'm reading here, I can't quite tell, but what I'm reading here is that there was there were requests to send money, but they were reported to the insurer, but you didn't really send any money out. So I guess there wouldn't be any claim for any lost funds in that type of situation. But one good thing that question makes me think about is cyber insurers often offer for free or at discounted prices risk mitigation services. So they may give you, free access to an attorney who specializes in privacy or data breach, or some company that will give you an hour or so to help you write an incident response plan for free, or at a super discounted price, or a firm to do a risk assessment of you at a discounted price. So I advise companies to take a good hard look at the services being provided by the carriers. Oftentimes, as I say, it's included within your premium dollars, so why not take advantage of it? I think there may be one more question down here. Is the webinar recorded to view again?
Yes. So, and I'm sorry for the
I believe it is. Oh, there you are.
Correct. Yep. Thank you so much for handling that all yourself, Judy. Yep. So the recording will be made available. We will email that to you. It'll be available on our website, but since you've registered, you'll receive that recording by email once it's available. And we'll also have the slide deck along with that recording file link.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is it's on the deck, and you can just go to my website, Judy Selby Consulting, and reach out to me through that. If you have any questions or issues, I know I was like kind of rapid fire. I know I was dealing with attorneys, so I wanted to provide a few more real tangible specifics, and get a little bit meatier with you, but I know it's a lot. We're drinking from the fire hose, so I'm happy to follow up with anybody.
Thank you so much, Judy. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. Again, thank you for handling questions with my bad internet connection or bad connection to Zoom. Just want to apologize to everyone else for that inconvenience. Should have it resolved for next month. And like I said, you will all receive the recording link and the slide deck by email. And again, thank you so much, Judy.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye now.